Living in this country, often we need groups that can get us moving. Because a lot of things happen, and sometimes you feel alone, but there are organizations across the province that keep us together and keep us connected and keep us protected. One of those organizations is Parents of Black Children. They've been an organization that's been around for 5 years, supporting Black families, Black children right across the province, and arguably right across the country. We're joined today by Kearie, Charline, and Xavier, who are all part of this organization that's now been around for 5 years. We're going to get in on why this organization has been so effective at moving the needle for Black children across the country, what they're concerned about, and what they're planning for the future. Kearie, let's start by talking about PoBC. It's been around for 5 years. 5 years ago now, you were an organization that was just becoming. Take me back into that room. What was happening?
5 years ago now, we were really just an idea. Parents of Black Children is truly a community initiative. It's truly a grassroots initiative that has come from community. And when we were thinking about how to tackle the anti-Black racism that many of us were facing in the school system, we were talking to each other. So we came from the idea of the genesis of the organization really came from groups of parents, mostly mothers, collectivizing, talking at a dance school in Markham about our children's experiences and what we felt needed to be done. So at that same time, all of us in varying ways were advocating on behalf of our children in the various institutions in which they were. So my children were in New York Catholic, Charlene's were in New York Public, and she was waging a public battle against that board. We have Claudette, another co-founder, who was also internal within New York Public, doing very similar advocacy work. And then we had other individuals who were also fighting their battles. And so the power of the organization was really in collectivizing and coming together, in ideating and creating this entity where our voice could be one. And that really was at the very beginning, and even now, our mantra was that we stand in front, we stand beside, and we stand behind Black parents, and we speak for Black students, we speak for Black parents, and we are. The beauty of PoBC is that it's not about an individual. We are every Black parent, every parent that is supporting a Black child.
So this collective of Parents of Black Children is really made up of individual stories. All of you as parents have experienced something that's brought you together for this collective. Can you each share a little bit about your personal stories? Why this particular organization for you and your family is so critical?
Every Black parent has a story. Every Black child has a story as they're navigating the education system. There's no question about that. For me and my family, it started as soon as my son entered school. And it was a lot of, I don't even want to say small, but a lot of incidences around behavior, around isolation of him. A lot of what we see that happens to Black boys. One of the things I remember in particular is just reading the report by Dr. Carl James called Towards Race, Equity, and Education, seeing what he listed as what happens to our Black boys by the time they're around 7 or 8 years old, and how they feel like school is not a place for him, and it was for them, and it was happening real time for me, with my son. Things like he's standing in line and being told, we're getting a call home, being told he's not standing in line properly, and he's 7. Right? Or he's fidgeting in class. And when I look at him, I'm like, well, has he gone to the bathroom today? And no, he hasn't gone to the bathroom, but they want to project and pathologize that there's something wrong with the child instead of addressing the actual environment of the classroom environment in the space, right? So it was a lot of those things, being sent out of class to walk around for whatever reason, but a lot of those isolations. And we had to spend many, many years trying to get my son back into a space where he felt comfortable in the school environment. And I know for a lot of parents, that's the anxiety that they have. They're afraid to open their email or pick up their phone because they're consistently getting calls from the school. Children can't breathe, they can't move without there being an incident or some kind of issue. And that's, for us, that was our story.
Charline, you're nodding your head. Seems like this is sounding kind of familiar.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I'm a mother of three, and our oldest had the same experience. He's a lot older than Kearie's child, and for us, we thought, we could, as parents, we could go in and have meetings. We had many meetings with the school board, and the relentless calls that we were getting was just overbearing. Kearie talks about the phone. Whatever job I had, I always had my phone with me. If I was going to the bathroom, if I was going to go to the mail room, or if I was picking up a print from the printing room, I would have my phone, because just in case the school call, I don't want to miss a call. And with our oldest, he was very excited. I remember his grade 1 teacher telling us, pretty much giving us a heads up. She said, the system is not ready for him. I had no idea what she meant. She said he's very articulate. He speaks up. He speaks his mind. He's very intelligent. I remember she said he has a zest for learning. And she told us in that moment, his first ever parent-teachers meeting, she goes, I give him 2 minutes at the end of the day for him to just be himself.
How did you feel when the teacher said the system's not ready for him?
I had no idea what she meant, but I didn't even ask. I was just elated to hear how great she was telling me my baby was, to be honest. So I ignored that piece, but I remember it. So when it started for him in grade 2, I remember one of the first experience he had was, he told me his grapes fell, and the teacher yelled at him so hard, her spit was all over his face. And, we addressed every single incident, but for us, over the years, it got worse. It was more and more and more, till he got to grade 9. And, Kearie talked about my public fight earlier. Like, we launched a human rights complaint against the school board. Because in grade 9, what his crime was in grade 9? He corrected his French teacher about the difference between Canadian football and American football. And it's what we see all the time. How dare you, black boy, tell me what to do? That wasn't her words, but that was her action. And she made his life a living hell. By the time we got to October, he had over 23 incidences of racial violence, I call them, because I'm not minimizing them, because I'm calling them microaggression. And it was a lot for him. And, we needed to do something. And I didn't even know about advocacy groups to even call in reinforcement, right? I was doing it on my own at first anyways, until another group of parents reached out and said we had similar experience. They weren't black. They were Muslim parents that said we had similar and we want to join, we want to support you. Right. That's how I got most of my wins. And then other communities came involved to support.
Xavier, what's your experience?
So it's funny hearing the different experiences, and I say funny in a very offhand kind of way, in that I feel like I had the experience of being both of their sons. So before I had the chance of being a parent, I actually had the chance, coming over as an immigrant, to live the experiences of their sons. So I smile sometimes because I can go back to moments when those exact same things happened to me, and I'm much older than their children. And so what that tells me is a lot of things have not changed. And while working at Parents of Black Children, I had the pleasure of becoming a parent. So it made the work even more meaningful for me, right? Because now I'm trying to correct things that not only happened to me, not only happened to my peers, but also trying to correct a future for my child that I see is currently still here that needs to be changed.
So change is the reason you're here, and change is the reason you formed 5 years ago. Take us back to what was happening at the time that drove this change. Your individual stories, yes, but what was happening also in the ecosystem across Ontario education?
I think it's very dependent on kind of where you're situated, but I don't think that there was anything in particular that was happening in the ecosystem that was any different than what would have happened, even 5 years preceding, before we existed. Black communities in this province, in this country, have advocated on behalf of their children in the education system since as long as there have been Black people in this country. We have been advocating and we have been supporting each other And we've been doing advocacy. We may not have been formalizing it, but we've been going to meetings. So-and-so has a meeting and they're going to bring this auntie with them, or they're going to go and collect this neighbor and take them to the meeting and sit there with the principal. That kind of advocacy, that kind of work, the knowledge that there is something wrong, inherently wrong with the education system and the way it treats and spits out our children, that we know that. And that has been with us since time, and that's how our families have been mobilizing since time. I think the difference was with parents of Black children was that we formalized advocacy in a way that it has never been formalized. It is now formalized because there are other organizations that have come after us or who have shifted the way in which they do the work to kind of model that formalized advocacy approach. But that's the difference, is we really kind of formalized and rooted it and gave it a pathway and made it identifiable, I think, to the system. Whereas before, that support has always been there. Our voices have always been strong. Parents have always been knocking on the doors and breaking down doors at board meetings and yelling and trying to get their point across. But it wasn't formalized in the same way.
You have an inside look at what's happening, not just in the school, but with families, not just your own families, but other families that you advocate for. I'm going to ask Xavier and then Charline, what are you seeing in Ontario schools? When you walk through those doors, when you're talking to those parents, those students, what are you hearing from Black families?
What we're hearing from Black families is feeling as though they're not present, they're not being represented, feeling as though when they are represented, it's being in positions of being over-surveilled or being pushed out or being marginalized. We're hearing from Black students at different ages and based on their stage of development, different stories. So if I look at our cases with children that are in grade 3 and under, it's a lot of instances of feeling neglected, feeling unheard, feeling as though, I think about a statement that a child made, I wish I wasn't Black because my teacher doesn't pick on me when I raise my hands, but they pick on everyone else. And I think it's because of the way that I look. Mm. I think about children between grade 4 and grade 6 that start to do things like self-harm and start to scratch the Black off their skin. And why? Because sometimes they're being called the N-word in school and it's being minimized, or it's being completely ignored based on an adult's comfortability with dealing with the subject of race. It's Black children that are being bullied and then responding to that bullying after numerous instances and numerous times of calling out for adults to help. Mm-hmm. And their response is what is policed. I think about an 11 or 12-year-old young girl who was tasered by the police. These are some of the stories and some of the things that we're hearing, but they're not the full gamut.
Right.
Because when I think about the other side of things, I think about Black parents with children who have individualized education plans, who are not getting the supports, not getting the resources. Then I think about other children who need individualized education plans, and their parents are crying out for it, sometimes with diagnosis of things like autism or being on the spectrum, and still not getting support for that.
You're giving me a lot of facts, but how are you feeling about it?
Like I said to you, I was a student in the Ontario education system. I've been able to, despite being a gifted student and being deemed as the only reason why they found out was because they thought that I had a learning disability. So I know what it's like to have to fight against the narratives. When Charline spoke about her son being spoken out, I was almost expelled from high school because of an essay that I wrote about Canada hiding its racism. Mm. So the way that I feel about it is not only passionate, but I feel as though it's work that's been here before me. It may be here after me, but it's work that I intend to make an impact on. And with parents of Black children, I think there's no better opportunity to create that impact.
Charline, how do you feel about all of this?
Wow, how do I feel? For me, I get to meet parents every day, especially mothers, and I get to hear their agony and their pain and how it's impacting the entire family. And it's hurtful, but I'm angry. I'm extremely angry about the freedom that is given to the educators to harm our children and the lack of support. I always cry when I think about this. The lack of support, the lack of resources, the lack of accountability, and just the way our children are expected to just be resilient in the face of all the racial harm that they get to see and experience. And for me, it speaks volume to how they see us, how they see our children. And, you know, we get to meet parents that are at different stages. And I say, you know, they try to make their children perfect. And I said, it doesn't matter how we are, how we show up, and we're still going to be treated as such because that's how they see us. And our children's ability to be resilient is not a cure for their systemic racism. It is telling on the government, on how they distribute resources and how they continue to use us as a pilot by putting these projects out there. And how when they're providing support, financial resources, there's a condition on it. We're giving you this, but you better not step out of line.
I won't lie, you sound exhausted.
Yes.
Like you sound exhausted on behalf of all of the parents that you're representing.
It's hard to do this without feeling and carrying it. And I want to say this, without tears, what I get to see from mothers, every single time I meet them, I get to see myself. And I meet mothers who carry a sense of guilt, that when their children used to come home and tell them, they didn't believe, because I was that mother. I was like so lost when my son would say to me in grade 2, Mom, they treat me differently. And I would hug him to try and hug and love away the pain that he carried. And for a while, I used to say it with tongue in cheek, I do this work as a love letter to my children. But when I rethink that, I realize how much I was pretty much beating upon myself for something I didn't know. So for me, for mothers, I want to say, it's not your fault. It's not, we didn't do this. This was done to us. And we can't keep carrying the guilt for something that we didn't even know was even happening or we didn't even recognize in the moment. So I've positioned that differently. And, you know, you say I'm exhausted, but it's also that push. Because every time we get a child, 2 things go through my mind. How many more are there that we haven't heard about? Or I'm going to get you justice, whatever that looks like, and we're going to hold them accountable.
Speaking of holding accountable, it's important to have these stories and know these stories because that's what informs a lot of the work. But often in organizations in Ontario, Canada, people want data. People want information because often that will help drive the change. Institutionally, they look for data. Kearie, can you tell us a little bit about the data that has been gathered over time, over the 5 years of PoBC, that is supporting this work and helping to inform the changes that you're looking for?
Parents of Black Children is a data-rich organization. So every family that comes to us, there's a whole host of data that we're collecting on their experiences and their outcomes. So we have, over the last 5 years, we've put together a systems abuse report, which took a look at the data that has come into us that really examined where our cases were coming from and what we were seeing in the education system. We've collected victim impact statements. We've collected over 70 victim impact statements from families, and that's an ongoing process that we continue to do. We have surveyed families around their experience. We've held workshops and had discussions with. So there are various ways in which we've collected data about the experience of Black children. We've presented that information to the Ministry of Education. We've presented it to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. The Systems Abuse Report is actually part of the Ontario Legislative Library. So it's also been shared with the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism and the Ministry of Community and Social Services. So there is no shortage of people in positions who hold positions of power and accountability who are unaware of what is happening to Black students. And I think what's really interesting is that it's not just us who hold and who share and who have compiled this data. There are many other organizations who have done the same thing, and many other individuals and organizations who have shared and compiled this data over decades. 50, 60, 70 years of data. What's interesting is that even with that data, 50, 60, 70 years of data about what's happening to Black children, nothing has been done, which tells us there is a lack of care. That's the only answer. If you have 50, 60, 70 years that says, white women are dying of breast cancer at higher rates, which they're not, but if the data said that,
right,
there would be 50, 60, 70 years of trying to stop that from happening, right? But we're not seeing that. That's not been our experience.
it doesn't sound like you feel it's urgent enough when the data is out there that it's being treated with the level of urgency and care.
There's no urgency. Our children are expected to go to school, have these horrifically violent experiences of anti-Black racism and survive them. So our kids we don't do that with any other form of abuse. So if a child is in a place where they're being sexually abused, if a child is in a place where they're being physically abused, there is a crisis response. And the immediate response is we need to get this child out of this situation. But when we have racial abuse, which is violence and harm, we don't see that kind of urgency and we don't see that response.
Kearie, can you give me a sense of the numbers of cases, numbers of children that you're looking at?
So for parents of Black children, in terms of the numbers that we're seeing, the number of cases come into us, since we launched our systems navigation program, which was launched around October 2020, I want to say, we've had over 650 cases. And each of those families that's one case that they've come to us with, but they never just come with one case, right? They have many more that they've also dealt with and many more that they will deal with in the future. So that's what we're looking at. And that's just us as one organization with a small team. We're part of a community of practice called the Student and Family Advocacy Program, where there are 16 other organizations who are also doing the same type of advocacy work, who are also getting cases across this province. And then those are the families that know about us. And there are many, many more who are navigating and dealing with this on their own because they don't know where to go for support, or they're bringing in their sister or their cousin or whoever it is that they feel can support them. So this is a crisis. We have to think about it as a crisis. As a Black community, this is a war. Because our children are in the line of battle. They're on the battlefield. When they step into school, there is no protection for them.
Charline, it also sounds like a human rights issue, too. How do you feel about that? And if it is a human rights issue, what has the Ontario Human Rights Commission, how have they responded to all this?
It is definitely a human rights issue. Our children's human rights is being violated on a daily basis. It's not a matter of if, it's how many times per day. We have hundreds of families who are in human rights complaint cases that are being settled, that are being litigated, in addition to even civil cases that they're filing. As far as the Human Rights Commission, we reached out last year with our 70 victim impact statements, and that was just minimum. That didn't even scratch the surface, because I'll tell you why. I myself didn't do a victim impact statement, even though I've had many incidents of anti-Black racism, because it's a lot to relive and write those stories down. And many families told us they couldn't.
Right.
So we started with the 70. And we reached out and said, here's what we're seeing. We reach out with our data, with our research, and we're asking for a provincial inquiry. So we brought it to their door. And what we have seen was just pushback, and pretty much as if we were being blamed and we were being treated as if we have, oh, what rights do you have to bring it? And we were even told, verbally and even in writing, there's been many reports done about you. And what I've always said about Black students, I should say, is that all of those reports have always been done as a side job. We were just part of the story. For example, the right to read, they included Black children. Suspension, they included Black children. We wanted something to center our children, look at them for who they are and their individual personal experiences. But that was too much. For me, why that hurts, because the Human Rights Commission was formed. That whole department was formed because of the rights of Blacks and what we were facing. And to see that we're saying our children, we see, it's insane to me when I think about the experiences that our children are having and they can't even be centered. It's almost as if they're stepchildren to the system.
Okay. So it sounds like all of you have concerns about the Ontario Human Rights Commission, its response or lack of response in your view. Kearie, what's your view on it? And then Xavier.
The Ontario Human Rights Commission has relinquished their responsibility to Black Ontarians. They have said to us that they've done enough. Mm-hmm. They've referenced reports that they've done. So they did a child welfare report called Interrupted Childhoods that looked at the overrepresentation of Black children in care. They've done another one around suspensions and expulsions that touched on Black children and their experience around suspensions in school, being pushed out of school. But there has never been in the history of this province a full inquiry that looks at the experience of Black children from kindergarten right up to grade 12 in Ontario's education system. The full gamut, the full experience, a wholesome inquiry. That doesn't exist.
To play devil's advocate a bit, they might suggest that when they did their initiative in 2023, when they started the Tackling Anti-Black Racism Education Initiative, that was an effort to tackle the issue.
The Ontario Human Rights Commission's response to what we put and what we brought to their doorstep around the experiences of Black children in Ontario's education system, it has been a minimal tick box. That's all they've done. They're ticking a box. It doesn't make sense to launch recommendations, so to do consultations and launch recommendations without actually uncovering what exactly the issues are, irregardless of how many other reports that you've ever done that has touched on the Black experience. The Black experience across multiple systems is a disparate one, right? There's disproportionality across all systems for Black students. What we're asking for, and what we have been asking for now over a year and a half, almost 2 years, is an inquiry that deeply examines, and documents for this province what our children are going through. That does not exist. There are parts of it. It does not exist, and it is the sole job of the Ontario Human Rights Commission to do that.
Xavier, how do you feel about the response from the Ontario Human Rights Commission?
As someone with business education, I feel like it's lackluster. And I feel like it blames the issue of efficiencies or a lack of staffing as a reason as to why we can't actually do the work. But I think that the Ontario Human Rights Commission is built on something much bigger, on I would say even an ideology that's much bigger than some of the responses that we're getting back. The responses seem very minimalistic. It seems as though, touching on exactly what Kearie says, it's tick boxes. So the reason why I feel as though this response is so lackluster is because there are no points of research. We're leaning on old data. We're not gathering the experiences post George Floyd, post all of this EDI work, post all of these fluff words and these fluff recommendations that we make, But then we continue to get cases where these things are not being addressed, not being implemented. And what's the point of creating recommendations without any form of implementation or any holding to saying that we are going to implement these things?
Most and many school boards do not understand that. There are many school boards in this province who don't think they have a problem with anti-Black racism, who don't think that Black students have a different experience. They don't believe that. And so in order for us to tackle that, the first step is to identify the problem. They have not identified the problem fully. So school boards can look at these recommendations and say, that's good for Toronto, that's good for areas where they have a lot of Black kids, that's great for Peel, but this doesn't apply to us. We don't have an issue here.
So Charline, with the Ontario Human Rights Commission initiative, there was an opportunity there for PoBC to be part of that conversation. Yes. Did PoBC engage in the conversation with the OHRC?
Did PoBC engaged? No. To answer the question, no. We were. There was a meeting had. And when we joined the meeting, because one of our partners told us about it, we were kicked out of that meeting where they brought together duty holders. And nothing in the Ontario Human Rights Commission report, recommendation, stated that PoBC brought this to their attention. So it's as if they woke up one morning and decided to do this on their own. What to Kearie's point and what Xavier was saying that I find very troubling, you talk about it being a crisis. If you think of COVID, that we just went through this pandemic, and I always say, us experiencing anti-Blackness, our children, is like a pandemic. When they knew areas of where COVID was on a rise or businesses, there was a particular mandate to shut those down and social distance. By not identifying and doing the full inquiry, boards are not identified where there is a problematic board so that they could see themselves and know what to do and have a recommendation for that board. By giving these recommendations, and we've seen the recommendations, we're quoted.
You're definitely cited in that report several times. PoBC is.
When I actually did a search and saw how many times PoBC was quoted, we were never at a table to give them our recommendations. What they did, they took the information we shared with them with the 70 victim impact statements, and they took it from that, or anything that we have posted publicly. Do you know what that does? As a Black organization, grassroots, that's our intellectual knowledge, that's our research, Black women.
Your time, your effort, your labor.
That right there is the epitome of white supremacists, taking our research and just using it and passing it off. And they could say, well, we quoted you. No, we didn't have that discussion for us to agree. What if we had something else we wanted to put in there? Because a lot of those recommendations we made over time, they were for specific situations that we were giving the ministry and whoever else recommendations. So that to us, it's like, we don't need you at the table, but we'll take your work.
So Kearie, it sounds like from your nodding head that you agree that there are some things that were missing from the Ontario Human Rights Commission report that you think needs addressing. What are some of those things?
I think that the community is missing. Community is missing from that compendium, from those recommendations. I think that the intention behind the recommendations that they've created was not one to truly solve the issue of anti-Black racism in our education system. The intention behind it was to say, we're checking this box, we've done something for you people because you keep yelling at us, but we're not going to include you in that conversation. We're going to exclude you, which is the antithesis of why the Ontario Human Rights Commission exists. So they didn't follow their own best practice, and they've created recommendations that include a lot of should've, would've, could've, you should do this, but there is no real tangibility or accountability for school boards to say you must do this. We're not interested in should'ves. We're interested in directives that say you have to do this. This is what's going to be the best for our students. This is what's going to make sure that our Black children are able to feel comfortable and safe and protected in your schools. That's what we're interested in. If you look at that Ontario, at those recommendations, it's school boards should. We need to see they must.
Xavier, what do you think is missing from the Ontario Human Rights Commission report?
There's so much missing, but I want to go to some of the most basic points. I think it's important to note that the Ontario Human Rights Commission doesn't really tackle the Ministry of Education's act. And I think if you don't tackle the act enough, if you don't talk about actually labeling Black children, Black families, Black parents, how are you actually going to deal with the issue? If we can't label an issue, and this is one of the biggest things that I've noticed in my experiences within Canada, we don't label things. And by not labeling them, or by sugarcoating or glossing over them, then we don't actually deal with things on their face. We don't actually tackle the problem. So one, we need to see Black children, Black families, Black students in the language of the Education Act. I think that's important. The other thing that I think is missing, again, is the actual research. You need to hear our voices. You need to hear our stories. When I think about education within Ontario and how from a very young age, you are taught to see your Blackness as being absent throughout the history of Canada. You are not taught that, a part of the Human Rights Commission, when you go and look at their history, one of the things that they talked about very clearly was in the beginning, there was actually legislation that said that you could not resell your home to a Jewish or Black individual. Why do I not learn these things in school? Why do I not learn that this commission, when we talk about human rights, when we talk about all this EDI work, why am I not learning that a lot of this was done off the backs of the struggle of my people? So I think that there are things missing within the report or within the recommendations. And if we don't speak to some of those things, then those recommendations are going to fall as flat as the paper that they sit on or the screens that we watch them on.
So, Kearie, given the OHRC report, the recommendations that were set out, and what they're planning, what is PoBC now planning?
I'll start by saying this. The recommendations that the OHRC recently released were not released with any intention of having any kind of action behind them. That means for us, as parents of Black children, as the organization, and as individual parents, this work once again lands at our feet because we care about our children. These are our children that are in the school systems being battered every day. And so for us as an organization, what that means is we'll be taking on this work ourselves. And so we'll be launching our own consultations. We're going to be going across this province. We will be speaking to community members, collecting a fulsome report around the experiences of Black children in the education system for the first time in this province. And then we'll be sitting with stakeholders, with our community, with community leaders, with those who have come before us, and we will be creating recommendations that we expect to be actionable, that we demand be actionable within all school boards across this province.
So, Kearie, how would you distinguish the key differentiator between the report that you're planning and the report that already exists from OHRC?
The key differentiator is that the report that we are planning will be community-based. It will be anchored in the live and real experiences of Black children across this province. Young people will be part of that conversation. Our parents will be part of that conversation, and it will be by community for our community.
So, Kearie, what can the community expect to see when it's all said and done?
This is going to be historic work. So the community can expect to see a full report that articulates their experience and their children's experience in the education system. And then on top of that, a list of a framework that identifies race equity practices, so best practice that school boards, that educators, that anyone that touches our Black children in the education system should be using when they are working with Black children, Black families. And the great thing about creating that kind of framework is that it's for our children, it's for Black children, but it benefits the education system as a whole. It serves to uplift, it serves to create space for all children that is equitable. And that's really what our outcome is. That's really what we're looking at creating. So the framework is really the piece that the community can expect to see and expect to see real difference in the educational experience for their children.
Charline, it sounds like with this process, the community is going to be really involved and really engaged. That's the PoBC's plan and intention with this. So what do you think the community needs to know as you're preparing to launch this initiative?
What the community needs to know as we're launching this is that we will be centering their voices, as what Kearie said. It is in line with how we work. We stand with our parents, and at times, sometimes we're in front. What was done by the OHRC is that lack of, it's what's already been done, that whole Band-Aid solution being described as progress. Like they give us crumbs and tell us it's progress, you know. There was nobody there to disrupt that. So they, as always, PoBC comes in as the disruptor, and which is why we weren't at that table, why we were marginalized, why we were refused, because they see us as adversary. But how else do we get change? How else do we get progress? How else have our people ever rise up in any situation? And they can expect that from us in true PoBC fashion. We'll be calling on them. We want the stories. I'll give you the story. Like when we went to court and we heard these are the judge words, a 275-pound man assaulted a 5-year-old child with autism. And the prosecutor it was just like another case on his docket. He didn't even fight for that child because he couldn't see himself in that child. And what was ruled that even though, as per the criminal code, it is an assault, the verdict came back not guilty. And that parent has to sit with that and explain that. So we need those stories, and they need to know they have been heard. That's what they could expect from us. We will hear them. We will make sure whatever doors we need to beat down, we're going to get them some level of justice.
Xavier, what do you want the community to know as the PoBC prepares for this launch?
I want the community to know that we're a narrative people. Throughout history, we've been a narrative people. Human beings are narrative people, but especially as Black people, we're a narrative culture. Your voice matters, and your voice matters because your story matters. And if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. So it's important for you to tell your story.
How they can get involved, or maybe they've been involved in other kinds of processes before. What do you want them to know about this process?
We're very aware that many of our community members may have participated in community consultations before, whether it's through the OHRC or through another initiative. What we want them to know is that this process is different. This is truly a community-based process. We are coming because we want to hear their voice, that their voice will be part of the report that we create, and that their voice will be part of the eventual framework with the race equity practices that we create as well. So we really want them to be on the lookout for the dates and times when we're going to be in their community, and we want them to come, bring their friends, and stay connected with us. So parents, community members, allies can reach us at www.parentsofblackchildren.org. We're also on all social media platforms at PoBC Advocate. So we encourage them to follow us because that's where you're going to get your information about when we'll be in your neighborhood, in your community.
Charline, throughout this conversation, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about a lot of stories. We've talked a lot about data. We talked about the need for this. But when we were talking earlier, you got emotional several times because this is hard stuff. Is there anything else that we might not have talked about that you think we should know?
It's hard to talk about Black children being abused by a system that's supposed to educate them and not get it emotional. It's hard to talk about the fact that a lot of our parents reach out to us for educational support, for racial harm that they're experiencing at school, or as well as neglect. And when we bring in the other institutions that are supposed to help us, the pushback that they get the minimizing of their concerns. So at times, our children have been abused physically by adults in the building, educators in the building. You know, one of the stories that stood out to me was an 8-year-old that was assaulted by a CYW. And the ED, the executive director for CAS, said that child ran into that CYW's hand. Where else do you hear that language, right? When women are being abused by their partners, we hear that a lot. So we do the victim blaming. When we call in CAS and we're telling them our children are facing emotional harm, physical harm, we're seeing CAS, the lack of substantiating the claim. And all our children have to do is go to school. And if they ever utter a word, please don't call my parents, I might get in trouble. CAS is not their door the next day or the same day. And when our children are telling you that they've been harmed, you know what we hear a lot of? Unless there is bruises or broken bones, we can't substantiate that claim. So these are the type of stories that will be coming out. These are the type of things that every time those questions are asked of me, I do get emotional because it is real.
And you should.
And it's real. Yeah. And I don't let anybody police my emotions. Like we go to meetings, we tell you we're here because our children are being abused. So we're going to come with a certain level of energy because we're matching what they have experienced. And you know what? I heard something recently and I chuckled because it was stated recently in the media. Many people stated, even the Prime Minister, you have a right to defend yourself. We have a right to defend our children. But when we do, you know what PoBC gets? We're angry. We are uncivilized. We are accused of everything you could think of that is used to describe us. But nobody asks them for proof. You know what we do? We make sure we record all of our meetings. Because why? We know if we're up against white women or men who's going to say that we come a certain way, that will be believed. So we now have to make sure, as a form of protection, we have video footage, we have recordings. I often joke around, should we be sending our children to school with body cams? Is that when they're going to be taken seriously? And that is why we have to do this. And again, on the shoulders of Black women, Black mothers.
I'm going to ask the same question to Xavier. What else do people need to know as you prepare for this launch?
I think it's going to be a battle that's worth fighting. It's going to be an uphill battle, but it's definitely going to be one that's worth fighting, and it's going to take as many of our people and also our allies as possible. So if there are those who see, recognize, don't want to be next, then please also help and reach out as well too.
Kearie, this is a lot of work that you have coming up, and I suspect it will need quite a bit of support from Black families, from allies, from others. How can people support this project?
Parents of Black Children is a registered charity, so any kind of monetary support, they can go onto our website, parentsofblackchildren.org, click on the donate button, and donate to us. We'll be able to provide a charitable tax receipt. But any amount, people need to realize that there's power in numbers, and if you're giving $5, even $10, as much as you can, as little as you can, every amount counts, and it helps us to be able to continue to do this work on our own terms. And that's really the key, is that we want to be able to galvanize our community to fundraise so that we can do the work ourselves and do the work on our own terms without having to be dependent on funding from agencies that we're also advocating against. And then there's also gift in kind. So if people want to donate time, if they have expertise in a particular area, they're always welcome to contact the organization, and we can figure out how they can best support and help us.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this. These aren't easy conversations. It's hard work. All of you have expressed that, but it's important work as we think about how we're progressing as people, as a community, as a city, as a country. It all happens by people like yourselves who are doing the work on the ground. So thank you.